Hello grade 8s and welcome to your first video of 2017. We are into your Renaissance unit and today we're going to be talking about Italian city-states. So in the previous lesson we did talk about Florence and Venice. We talked a little bit about how they made their wealth and we know that there's some competition between them. But today I want to talk about how these city-states were run or governed, which is your learning objective. They might have different types of leaders, and we're going to talk about that today. They may not be run in the same way. They might not be organized in the same way, but we're going to do a general overview of what their government system might look like. So if you recall, each city-state has its own identity, it has its own culture, it has its own government, it has its own art. I could go on and on and on, but I won't. So today we're going to look at a general overview and we're going to talk about Florence a little bit because as we know that is going to be the major player among Naples, among Rome, Venice, and Milan. Okay, let's get started. So urban nobles. The wealthy men of the Italian city-states were a new type of leader. They were urban nobles. Before this time, European nobles got their wealth from land. So if you recall when we talked about the feudal system in England during medieval ages, it was very important to have lots of land. That is how you got your wealth and your power. However, that is changing. Now nobles are getting their money from trade, from being merchants. In fact, they used to look down on trade and believe themselves to be above being a merchant. However, in the Italian city-states, old noble families started moving into the cities. They would move into Florence, they would move into Rome, etc., etc. They began mixing with the wealthy merchants and decided that money from trade was just as good as money from land. Meanwhile, wealthy merchants copied the manners and lifestyles of these noble families because they're friends, just like how you might do your hair the same as your best friend, or you might want to buy the same headphones as your friend because what they do is cool and you like them. So that's what we're seeing at this time. These people are mixing, they're hanging out, and they're copying each other's trends. It's bound to happen. Soon the sons and daughters of nobles and rich merchants were marrying each other. Eventually, the old nobles and wealthy merchant families blended together to become the upper class of the city-states. And again, that's something that's new in Europe. If you remember the feudal system in England, it's going to be a little bit different this time. The hierarchy is changing. We're going to have an upper class, a middle class, and a lower class. Okay, let's look at how city-states were governed. How were they ruled? What was their government like? At first, many of the city-states were republics. You might notice that this word republic is a different color of text. That is because it is a key word. So please underline it, or if you want to take a highlighter, or if you want to put a star beside it, whatever symbol you want to use so that you know that as a keyword. That's important to note for this unit. So a republic is a government controlled by its citizens. Not everyone was a citizen, however, only the artisans and merchants who have membership in the city's guilds. Also, it's important to know that to be a citizen, that means to have a vote. You probably had to be over 18. You had to be male. And you had to have some money, meaning you would be a middle class or upper class family. In the Italian city-states, many cases, the cities were ruled by powerful men who ran the government. So if a city-state was not a republic, meaning that citizens had a vote, then that city-state might have a dictator. That might be a new word for you guys. You might have discussed that in language arts when you were looking at the book Thief. But a dictator, like Hitler, is when there's one powerful leader who can control everything. And that's not a new form of government. That's been around for a long time. If you remember back to when we were talking about Egypt, the pharaohs would control everything. They were all powerful. So Some city-states have a republic where citizens can vote, whereas others, they're just run by one person, and they would control the city-state. Okay, and we're going to talk about one right now, right here. So in Venice, for example, the head of the state was the duke or doge. That's how you pronounce this word right here. So at first, the doge had great power over his council of nobles. Later, he lost his power to a small group of nobles. In Florence, again, we're coming back to Florence, the powerful Medici family gained control of the government. And here, let's take a look at that. We did shortly mention the Medici family in the previous lesson. And this is going to be important to know, which is why Medici is highlighted there. So make sure you have that into your notes and you've highlighted it. Okay, so we have the powerful Medici family who gained control of the government. The Medici ran Florence for many, many decades. Lorenzo de' Medici ruled the city from 1469 to 1492. He was known as the Magnificent, and here I have a statue of him that someone has made during the Renaissance. And for those of you who play Assassin's Creed, I know I keep coming back to that game. Here's his character. So he is featured in the game. He's a real historical figure who you can see in the game. Okay. So Lorenzo used his wealth to support artists and architects and writers. So even though he was a dictator, doesn't mean he was all bad, because he gave his money to support the arts and to improve Florence. So he just wanted to see good things happen to Florence. Another important guy that you should know, he was not a ruler, but his name is Niccolo Machiavelli, and here's a picture of him. So Machiavelli was a diplomat in Florence, and he wanted to know how could a ruler maintain power in the city-state. So he worked alongside the Medici family. Well, he actually wrote a book called The Prince. It's a very famous book. You might read it in high school or in university. But in The Prince, Machiavelli claimed that people were greedy and self-centered. So people were born greedy and just cared about themselves. He said rulers should not try to be good. Rather, they should do whatever is necessary to keep power and protect their city. That might even include killing and lying. So he published all this in a book, and he actually said that. Today, when we say someone is being Machiavellian, we mean that they are being tricky and not thinking about being good. And we're going to talk about Machiavelli a little bit more in class on Thursday because he's a really interesting figure. Okay, let's get back to city-states and how they were governed. Okay, politics in Italy was really, really complicated. Each city-state had its own problems. For example, rulers had to keep the poor from rebelling. They had to prevent other wealthy people from trying to seize power from them. They had to make deals with merchants, bankers. Remember, we talked a lot about banking in Florence. They had landlords. They had church leaders. They had mercenaries. At the same time, they had to deal with other leaders from other city-states. So it's getting really complicated now. To deal with all other states around them, the Italians developed diplomacy. And again, there's a keyword for you. Diplomacy is the art of negotiating or making deals with other countries. Each city-state sent ambassadors to live in other city-states and act as representatives for their city. Many of the ideas of modern diplomacy first began in Italy's city-states. So we often talk about ambassadors living in other cities. Something in the CNN student news we watched this week involved the Russian ambassadors being kicked out of the United States for possible tampering in the election. So all these ideas of modern politics and diplomacy, the act of getting along with other city-states, is really developing during this time in the Renaissance and in these Italian city-states. All right, grade eights, we're going to stop there today. If you have any questions, anything that's popped into your mind, just ask me in class on Thursday. We can talk about it. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Medicis and Machiavelli in class. All right, guys, see you then. Bye-bye.